April 2022, Cuiabá, Mato Grosso State, Brazil. In one of the city's residential neighborhoods, life continued as usual. Cars drove through the streets, occasional passers-by went about their business, and children's voices could be heard. Everything seemed quiet. Everyday life went on behind the walls of the houses. In one of them, however, something happened that would later become the focus of the investigation. The building did not stand out from the neighboring houses. During the day, several people entered the building, and in the evening they left again. No noises, no signs of commotion. Everything seemed fine. Passers-by took no notice of what was happening. There was no cause for alarm. Only later did it become clear that events were taking place at precisely this time that no one suspected. Heloísa Maria Souza was born in Cuiabá and lived with her mother, Suliane, and her grandmother. The family led a reserved and orderly life and did not stand out among the neighbors. Suliane worked, took care of the household, and raised her daughter. Heloísa attended a private school in the city's administrative district. Her teachers described her as a quiet and diligent student. She avoided conflicts, completed her assignments conscientiously, and was easygoing with others. The girl's circle of friends was limited. Her only friend, in whom she confided, later reported that Heloísa exhibited characteristics typical of a mild form of autism. An official diagnosis was not made, but her behavioral characteristics matched the described criteria: reserve, avoidance of eye contact, and inner tension when interacting with people. Nevertheless, she remained open with those she trusted. She was particularly interested in animals. Heloísa had dreamed of becoming a veterinarian since childhood and seriously considered pursuing relevant training. According to her grandmother, the girl was very independent. She could cook, run the household, and took care of her pet. She didn't need constant supervision and knew exactly what she wanted. Benito Bruno de Santana was born in 1984 in the state of Mato Grosso. His family lived a modest life. He was the younger of two brothers. The older one was later involved in criminal proceedings for the murder of his ex-wife. His father worked as a laborer. His mother took care of the household, and the family lived in a suburb of Cuiabá. According to neighbors, the brothers' relationship with their parents was distant. Both were very withdrawn from an early age. As a teenager, Benedito began attending the local Catholic church and gradually became involved in organizing religious services. This involvement eventually became an important part of his public image. After graduating from high school, he took a job at a municipal government agency. Thanks to his hard work and useful contacts, he gradually rose to a leadership position. He headed the transportation department in the state's Secretariat for Science, Technology, and Innovation, CESA-TT. His work ensured him a stable income, access to official vehicles, and respect within his professional circles. He actively participated in public life, frequently appearing at town hall meetings, discussing urban development issues, and proposing solutions to local problems. He continued to serve as an altar boy in his parish. His social media pages were filled with photos of religious events, quotes, and pictures with his son Lucas. In most publications, he was seen either next to churches or surrounded by parishioners. This created an image of a righteous and family-oriented person, and very little is known about his private life before his relationship with Suliane. At the beginning of their relationship, he was unmarried and did not live with the mother of his child. Details about other relationships are unknown. Judging by his behavior, he tried to maintain control over the perception of his biography and avoided mentioning his past if she didn't fit the desired image. Suliane worked at a government facility in Cuiabá. There she met Benedito. He appeared calm, attentive, and reserved. His colleagues valued him as a reliable and responsible employee who showed initiative and helpfulness. The positive image that had formed of Benedito was one of the reasons why Suliani entered into a closer relationship. According to official sources, their relationship began about 4 months before the events. Some witness statements suggested a shorter period, about 2 months. However, the investigation confirmed that Benedito had free access to her house keys, indicating a stable and trusting relationship. His regular visits to Suliani's apartment testified that he had become part of her everyday life. The man often visited her without prior arrangement, felt safe, and behaved like a full member of the family. His behavior was perceived by those around her as a sign of care and helpfulness. In the first few weeks, he made a positive impression. He was polite, reserved, non-aggressive, and easily connected with Suliani's family members. She perceived him as a mature and stable person, someone she could rely on. He was older, had a stable job, and appeared outwardly well-balanced. However, the family members' perception was different. Eloisa's grandmother was concerned not by his rude behavior, but rather by his excessive demonstrativeness. The man was polite, but it seemed too intrusive. His efforts seemed unnatural. Eloisa felt uncomfortable from the start. She didn't provoke conflicts, but tried to avoid contact. She only discussed her feelings with her friend. The girl admitted to feeling a dislike, although she couldn't pinpoint the exact reason. His manner of looking, speaking, and posing in photos worried her. She was particularly concerned by social media posts, in which he used gestures reminiscent of signs used in criminal circles. Eloisa told her friend that she had the impression he might be connected to criminal circles. She didn't discuss it with her mother, believing she wouldn't understand or pay attention. According to her friend, Suliani either didn't notice any changes in her daughter's behavior or didn't attach any importance to them. No one in the family asked questions about Benedito's past, his acquaintances, or previous relationships. His behavior was unremarkable. This was precisely what made him particularly dangerous. Outwardly, he appeared to be a wealthy man without conflicts or signs of aggression, who had already integrated into family life. Only Eloisa sensed that he was a stranger. Friday, April 22, 2022, a workday in Cuiabá. Around 3:00 p.m., Suliani and her mother were at work. Eloisa stayed home. She wasn't expecting any visitors and didn't leave the house. No suspicious vehicles were seen near the house. Everything seemed quiet. At that time, Benedito arrived at the house in a police car assigned to him by his department. With him were 3 teenagers, his son Lucas and 2 minors. According to the statements, they had been instructed beforehand. All 3 hid in the car to avoid being caught on camera and attracting attention. Their task was to wait until there were no adults left in the house. The car drove into the garage. Benedito entered the house alone. Video footage shows that he stayed in the house for about 15 minutes. Afterward, he came out, got into his car, and drove away. His behavior did not arouse suspicion. He remained calm. However, during his stay, he managed to let 3 young men into the house and leave them alone with Eloisa, who had no idea what was going on. According to one of those involved, they waited for Benedito to leave the premises. Then they put their plan into action. Eloisa was frightened when she saw unknown people and tried to hide, but one of them caught up with her. She didn't resist, was in shock, and didn't scream. She was immobilized by having her legs tied. Later, she was taken to a room where she was strangled with a USB cable. The investigation revealed that one of the teenagers committed the crime on Benedito's orders. At the time of the crime, Benedito was not at home. He was away on business, but according to the perpetrators, he knew what would happen. The instructions had been given in advance. According to the teenagers, he demanded precision and asked that everything be made to look like a burglary. After the crime, the perpetrators remained in the house. They wrapped Eloisa's body in a cloth, took her to another room, and then began to create a mess to simulate a burglary. One of them checked her pulse and breathing, but she showed no signs of life. Everything happened very quickly. About half an hour later, Benedito reappeared near the house, but without a car. He had left it behind and arrived on foot. Everything in the house was already prepared for the next phase, the attack on the mother. Around 6:00 p.m., Suliani returned home. A relative arrived with her, holding a baby. Surveillance cameras recorded their approach. The house appeared quiet. There were no lights on, but the air conditioning was running, which struck Suliani as odd. She called for her daughter, but no one answered. The women entered the house. At that moment, the three young men struck. They attacked Suliani, using physical force, throwing her to the ground, tying her up, hitting her several times, and dragging her inside the house. The woman with the child remained unharmed. She was told to sit down and be quiet and was not touched. The baby remained in her arms. At first, Suliani didn't understand what was happening. She was tied up, thrown to the ground, and isolated in one of the rooms. She thought it was a robbery and that her daughter was in another part of the house, possibly also tied up. No one explained anything to her. The attackers didn't name her or reveal their faces, but at some point, she recognized the voice of one of the attackers. It was Lucas, Benedito's son. At that moment, she began to suspect that the robbery was no accident. After Suliani was isolated, the young men continued to carry valuables out of the house. In the trunk of Suliani's car, they loaded a television, electronic devices, documents, and a bundle wrapped in a sheet containing Heloise's body. Everything happened quickly and quietly. They used the family's private vehicle to transport the stolen items. Neither neighbors nor random passersby noticed any signs of illegal activity. Once the removal was complete, those involved left the house. Suliani was left in the house with injuries, tied up, and unaware of what had happened to her daughter. She assumed Heloise had been taken away, but didn't know she was already dead. The robbery had been carefully staged. The apartment was in chaos. The cupboards were open. The electricity was off. Outwardly, everything looked like a chaotic robbery. In reality, however, it was a pre-planned sequence of actions aimed at disguising the crime as a robbery. Shortly after the young criminals disappeared, Benedito reappeared near the house. He only entered after making sure everything was in order. Suliani, who was inside, told him what had happened. She told him that unknown people had broken into the house, attacked her, took her belongings, and kidnapped her daughter. Benedito reacted theatrically, acting surprised and concerned, even though he already knew what had happened. He acted as if he had just learned about the incident. He even offered to take Suliani to the nearest hospital. Along the way, he began calling acquaintances, recording voice messages, and preparing publications. The goal of these actions was to create the impression that he was participating in the search and actively responding. In conversations, he claimed that his stepdaughter was missing and asked for this information to be disseminated. On social media, he posted a photo of the girl and an emotional post pleading for help. All of this was intended to convey the impression of a concerned parent. He arrived at the medical facility with Suliani, who had been brought in a wheelchair. The cameras recorded him helping her, talking with the staff, and staying close to her. He did not avoid video surveillance. On the contrary, he was captured on all available recordings. After receiving information about the attack and the alleged abduction, the police launched an initial investigation. Suliani was in the hospital, where her statements were recorded, after which the analysis of the evidence began. One of the first steps was to track the route of the vehicle, a silver Hyundai registered to Suliani. Surveillance cameras recorded the vehicle's progress. It was seen on Dubai Avenue and then headed toward the area between Ribeirão do Lipa and the road to Gia. A white cloth ball, removed license plates, and skid marks were found in this area. A concrete well was located nearby, where the perpetrators had dumped the body. The fire department was called to retrieve it. The investigation revealed that the deceased's legs were tied. There were signs of strangulation on her neck. No signs of resistance or struggle were found. Experts also determined that the foot fracture occurred after death, likely during the fall into the shaft. At this point, investigators were already analyzing family relationships. While analyzing the video footage, they noted the behavior of Benedito, who accompanied Suliani and showed great commitment. The woman's statements, the technical details, and the man's behavior began to contradict each other. At the same time, the investigation into his son Lucas's involvement began. The first to be arrested was a 17-year-old young man, whose name was not disclosed. He was in a residential complex in the Ribeirão do Lipa district. He offered no resistance. During interrogation, he gave detailed statements and named all those involved, including Lucas, the second minor, and Benedito, the initiator. He explained how the group was formed, who performed which tasks, and described the sequence of events. Based on the information obtained, Lucas was located. He was found with his grandmother. The arrest took place without incident. He confirmed his accomplice's statements and did not deny his own role. He stated that his father had personally commissioned him to find the perpetrators, hand them the plan, and coordinate the actions. According to him, the initiative came from Benedito, while Lucas acted only to gain his approval. The third participant was the last to be arrested. He had hidden in an undeveloped part of the Tropicalville district. Part of the loot was found on him, documents and technical devices. He confessed to his involvement but gave less detailed statements. At the time of his arrest, the investigating authorities already had extensive information. The items found confirmed the statements of the detainees. The consistent confessions formed the main evidence. They described how they had prepared the crime, who was responsible for what, which actions were carried out in which order. The version about Benito's leading role was confirmed not only by technical data but also by their statements. At the first confrontation, Benedito and the 17-year-old boy were present. The latter immediately stated that Benedito had organized everything. He had taken them to the house and left the building to carry out the plan. He explicitly described him as the organizer who had relayed the instructions and assigned the tasks of each participant. During the lineup, Benedito attempted to refute the accusations by calling the teenager a liar and mentally unstable. He claimed he could not have harmed Heloisa and barely knew the young people his son associated with. However, Lucas was soon brought into the interrogation room. His behavior was surprising. He looked at his father and said, "You're leaving again, like you did that time. First, you disappeared from my life. Now you want to leave me here. Admit that you made all this up." This sentence was the turning point. Lucas did not try to absolve himself of guilt, but openly stated that he had acted on his father's orders. His words were accompanied by strong emotions. Accusation and anger were evident in his voice. After that, Benedito's behavior began to change. He seemed less confident, gave evasive answers, and tried to shift responsibility onto others. Benedito later presented a new account of events. He explained that Suliani had confided in him that her daughter had a non-traditional sexual orientation and asked him to protect the girl from negative influences. He claimed that he understood this as a call to action, but there was no evidence to support this interpretation. A friend of Heloisa told police that the girl had never had romantic relationships, rarely discussed private matters, and generally led a very withdrawn life. Relatives confirmed that Heloisa showed no interest in intimacy and had no contact outside of her immediate circle. Investigators interpreted Benito's statement as an attempt to shift the blame onto Suliani in order to exonerate himself. However, there was no evidence that the mother could have been involved in the crime in any way. Instead, Benedetto began to paint a picture of himself as a misguided man who misunderstood words and never gave concrete instructions. The psychological assessment revealed signs of strategic behavior. Benedetto attempted to influence others without appearing in the picture himself and strove to maintain control over the proceedings. The statements of the young people involved clearly showed that Benedetto was the driving force but remained in the background. He assigned tasks, determined the timing, and tried to maintain an alibi. It also became known that Benedetto's biological brother had been convicted in 2020 for the homicide of his former wife. The crime had occurred in broad daylight on the street. Although he was already under conditions, he was able to carry out the crime. The police recorded this fact, even though there was no legal connection. However, the recurring pattern of violence within the family was striking. Against this background, Benedetto's personality increasingly emerged as that of a planning and controlling person. He not only involved young people in the events but also deliberately included his own son, assuming that he would remain silent. His actions appeared well considered and coldly calculated. Attempts by the defense to establish an alternative account of the crime were unsuccessful. In addition to the statements of those involved, objective evidence also incriminated Benedetto. When confronted with the results of the investigation, he began to open up. In a conversation with the officers, Benedetto said that shortly before the crime, he had read messages between Suliani and her former partner. This had affected him deeply. He felt betrayed and emotionally hurt. At that moment something clicked, he explained. I didn't want to kill her. I wanted her to understand what it was like to lose something. If she had lost her daughter, she would never have recovered. That was the punishment. He further admitted that Heloisa had often been reserved towards him. He sensed that she did not accept him and observed him critically. Nevertheless, he emphasized that he had nothing against the girl and tried to justify his actions as an attempt to save his relationship with her mother. This confession confirmed that it had not been a rash act carried out in a moment of impulse. The motives were personal. It was about revenge, control, and making a statement, with a calm and planning hidden behind a bourgeois facade. Later, it also became clear that the violence against Suliani was not a random product. It was part of a well-thought-out plan. The aim was to weaken her, to break her resistance, and at the same time to create a scene that would look like an attack. Benedetto wanted to use her physical and mental state to present herself in a better light and to divert any possible suspicions. And so it happened. At that time, Suliani did not yet know that her daughter was already dead. She was beaten and tied up as part of a carefully crafted lie. After completing the initial investigation, the public prosecutor's office confirmed that this was a murder committed with premeditated intent and under aggravating circumstances. The involvement of minors in organizing the crime through deception, advanced planning, the use of a company car, and the attempt to fake a kidnapping strengthened the prosecution's position. Benito remained the prime suspect because he was arrested, removed from office, and shortly thereafter officially dismissed. Since he held a commission position in a government institution, the dismissal was swift. The termination documents were signed on the day of his arrest. At the time of the investigation, all those involved were in custody. The young people were transferred to an appropriate facility. Lucas, who had just turned 18, was awaiting trial as part of an adult criminal case. The public reaction was fierce. The murder of a young woman, in which her stepfather was involved, triggered a wave of outrage. The case received considerable attention in the local media. Discussion focused not only on the brutality of the crime, but also on motives related to control, dominance, and personal insults. The focus was on the question of trust in relationships, How could a man who appeared decent on the outside plan a crime against his partner's daughter? Suliani learned of her daughter's death while still in the hospital. Uendo is the sasta first as a temper astery, to riot, to well. Is to isn't in. After the attack, she was taken to the nearest emergency room where she received care. Initially, she believed Heloisa had only been kidnapped. She hoped the girl could be found alive and rescued. After the investigation began, when police found the body in a well, Suliani was informed. The reaction was violent. The woman lost control of herself. She fell into hysteria. Her condition was described as a state of shock. She had to be sedated with medication. Eyewitnesses in the hospital reported that she screamed that she didn't feel alive, that everything was over, and that it was her fault. Later, during her testimony, Suliani admitted that she blamed herself for what happened. She said she didn't recognize the true face of the man she lived with. According to her, Benedito seemed reliable, friendly, and attentive. He cared for her, helped with the housework, seemed religious, smiled, and was polite to her mother. No one in the house saw him as a threat. Only Heloisa distrusted him from the beginning. But Suliani considered this youthful rejection. She never imagined that the man she had welcomed into her family was capable of such a thing. After the investigation was completed in May 2022, the public prosecutor's office filed charges against Benedito and his accomplices. The trial took place in public and attracted public and media attention. Evidence was presented during the trial, including surveillance camera footage, witness statements, and the defendant's confession. Benedito was found guilty of organizing and executing the crime. The court considered the premeditation of the acts, the involvement of minors, and the brutality of the crime. He was sentenced to 40 years in a maximum security prison. His son, Lucas, who was 18 at the time, was sentenced to 20 years. The court found that his involvement was deliberate and that his age was not a mitigating factor. The other 2 minors involved were sent to a youth detention center for up to 3 years, where their behavior will be monitored and their rehabilitation assessed. This family's story ended tragically, but it taught an important lesson. It showed that evil can hide behind kindness. The best protection is attention to small details, which are often the first signs of impending danger. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.